the way you want to go. And then several years ago, I got the most beautiful coffee table book from my bank here in town that was on the Rio Grande. And I mean, it told the story of the river through pictures, and of course, Robert Redford doing the intro didn't hurt. But it was just the most beautiful book, and I opened it up and I saw that it had been put together by my dear friend Alex Hanna, and I had no idea that Alex had projects like that. So ring, 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 phone calls, and so Alex and I started talking about how we could put together a book, and we were pretty naive at the time because we kind of just thought how easy it's going to be to get a book done of La Fonda, and when we started into the process, we had very few photos. We had very few, you know, our archives weren't very robust. So as Alex and I started talking, we tried to figure out how we wanted to do a book to tell the La Fonda story. And so the then and now kind of became obvious after we started looking at what we had. And then we kind of threw a lot of different categories up against the wall in terms of how we could tell it. And as this process evolved, you know, obviously Stephen came to mind to try to lay out the introduction. Barbara came to mind because she has helped us bring La Fonda what it is today and has done so much research about Mary Coulter and the historical architecture. Cyndy came to mind because Cyndy is the most creative. She can make the most drab sentence pop and be fun and interesting. And so we really wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a drab history book. And so that's kind of the genesis of the book. So why don't I let Alex kind of take it from there as the next steps?
Well, it was so fun to work with Jenny Kimball. I'm sure most of you know Jenny pretty well. She's a lot of fun. And we were on a committee together for an event, and I had been saying to her for a while, you know, because I was doing coffee table books, and I thought, this is a meaty, exciting book we could work on together. So I remember taking her to lunch a little over 2 years ago, and I said, we gotta do this book, Well, there's so much great, the renovation of the hotel was already well underway, more than halfway done, and looked amazing, and I had seen some old photos, and I was like, these before and after, the then and now photos are so strong. So that was the genesis, the creative kernel of the whole thing was this before and after, or then and now. And some of those images just were obvious. We had them already. There were just amazing old photos and then amazing new photos. And then some, and I want Cyndy to talk a little bit about this. Cyndy was very involved with the creative process of the whole book coming together, and she helped us get some of the newer imagery as well. We had our challenges. I would say it was a very, very big treasure hunt, and we also had a fairly tight time frame that we outlined for ourselves, which frankly, I think Jenny many times would have loved to have changed those deadlines, and I kind of kept us on those deadlines. I cannot tell you how many phone calls I got from Jenny where she said, but what if we didn't find something? What if something comes out right after we publish the book that didn't get included? So, we're gonna do our best. So we had an army of people, and Barbara, of course, and Stephen have so much knowledge. And then we had all sorts of other people, and Cyndy can talk a little bit about some of the people she recruited to get us all this information. But we were hunting at archives, of course here, Arizona, and things would come in, and then, thousands of images, thousands of pieces of information would come in, and then it's, do we include it? Do we not include it? That was the crux, the challenge. And of course we wanted to tell the history. I know you all appreciate that we're telling the history, but we wanted it to be beautiful and fun and something you can enjoy and flip through and just eye candy, right? So there were lots of things that didn't make it in the book, but I don't think we missed anything, more or less. You want to talk a little bit?
Me? Okay. So, I actually was aware that there was a problem when we needed a book like this, because when I was researching out there for America, I remember coming to Sam Ballin and asking him to see the archives for the, for La Fonda, because I'm sure I figured they had a lot, and I assumed the museum also had a lot. And Sam showed me like a little pamphlet that somebody had written like in the 60s, which he could not give me a copy of. And when I called back later to get a copy of it, he said he couldn't find it. And in fact, during much of the time we were doing the book, I was still waiting for somebody to find it. Steve Wimmer, thank God for Steve Wimmer, emailed me a copy not long before my deadline was due. The biggest artifact thing that I had was when Ernesto worked here. He took me down to the basement, and he said, here's a picture of Freddie Harvey digging the foundation for the new hotel. It was stuck on the wall of the basement. So that was the archiving process that existed at La Fonda before Jenny was completely in charge. So jump ahead, two springs ago, after Fred had weekend, we were at El Tovar. And Jenny said, I need to talk to you about something, and she bought lots of beer. And we were there with that Mother Road beer that they had just made with the drawings from El Tovar on it, and we stocked up on the beer. And I didn't know what she was going to ask me. I mean, she made like the biggest, most secret thing in the world that I was going to say no to, and our entire friendship was going to fall apart. And she asked me if I would write the introduction to the book, which I'm sure she thought would be much shorter than what I ended up writing. And so I said, of course. And so we started thinking about what the introduction to the book should be, what the real history of the hotel was. And besides the things that had been written about it before, it gave me an opportunity. I had been, over the years, actually after my book came out, sort of coming to the conclusion that a lot of what the Fred Harvey Company did was, for all the years that it was not in Santa Fe, it was basically delivering a sort of World's Fair version of Santa Fe, trackside, in Albuquerque, in other places, because people couldn't actually get to Santa Fe directly on the train. But the vibe that was in these hotels and in the gift shops was really something that the Harveys themselves had discovered here. And Trading Post to a lesser degree, but it really for Santa Fe. So it seemed that from a cultural perspective, besides the history of the hotel itself, the building itself, that what Santa Fe meant to the Fred Harvey Company, and then what La Fonda meant to Santa Fe, was all intertwined in a way that I hadn't seen a lot of writing about. Because the other part of it is I think that sometimes historians don't want to give commercial businesses credit for being parts of social things. You know, they want the social trends to not be about not about the hotels, not about the businesses. So I tried to write a social history of before La Fonda was here and after, which also gave me an opportunity to write a little bit about how the city tried to get Fred Harvey to come for years, which I didn't really know, and I actually had never read anywhere before, that Santa Fe, from the beginning of the City Different movement, was begging Fred Harvey to open a hotel. So that's 1911, and La Fonda didn't open until 1926. So they had an idea that it was really important to take the next step for the Harvey Company, even though they were here all the time. The Harveys were always here. They were always buying art here. They stayed in different hotels. So it was just a cool opportunity to do some writing that I never would have gotten to do in the book itself. And it never occurred to me how gorgeous the book would be, though, because we who write books with just print in them and little black and white pictures never imagined the possibility that you could write something that would go with all this beauty. So I was really happy to be involved in it. It was a little nuts towards the end, but only in a fun way. At least that's the way I remember it now. So anyway, it was really fun to be involved. If you guys haven't read the book, I really encourage you to do it. And also just page through it because it's gorgeous.
Cyndy, do you want to talk about your chapter and how you started gathering what you wanted to put in it?
Well, originally Jenny and Alex took me to lunch at La Fonda, and
You didn't get lunch? I got beer.
I recall you visited us several times during that lunch and said, Jenny, I really need you to come over here right now and choose the final stain. Because we were in the process of renovation was parallel to the production of the book, and it just added just a little more intensity because there was quite a bit of politics going on with when you change an iconic institution that everybody has an opinion on in Santa Fe. So as the book was, being produced and as the renovation was progressing, letters to the editor were appealing daily. I love you, I hate you, I love you, I hate you. And we were, influenced by it too, because how do you tell the story of this iconic institution in a way that Alex would say, I have to go to the printer with something real, so condensing that amount of information. So my original lunch was asking me to write about, they knew how to seduce me. They said, write about parties, and I was like, parties? I just thought this was the greatest idea ever, but to try to make that a tangible thing through, the information is elusive, and then I just started going, well, what do you love about La Fonda, and looking into the history, and the graphics were so beautiful for the menus. The food was such an amazing story. Just everywhere I turned, there was a story that's still living in town. Every event I attended between January and the last minute when Alex said, don't call me again with another idea, what should be included. I asked people, and the stories, that was the most thrilling part of the process for me, was just hearing the La Fonda stories, many of which couldn't be printed, from absolutely respectable people in town. The head of the public radio station in town said, boy, my 21st birthday, that was the only place I wanted to go to have my first legal drink, and I ended up locked in the kitchen for the night and woke up in the middle of the night and ate a whole tub of vanilla ice cream. It was not released until the morning. It's kind of like, that isn't going in the book. What a great story. And so I just got so thrilled with the stories and ended up, kind of talking about, then and now. And my essay was pancakes and plutonium. And I just loved the stories, and we really could do another book with how many stories there are left. And and because I work as a photo stylist, some new photos needed to be made. And I had a lot of fun working on some of the new photos for the culinary photos. And the one I had the most fun with was our all-female, dressed in hot pink, mariachi Buenaventura in town. And I thought, what is a better now for La Fonda than an all-female mariachi band photo shot on the roof in the perfect sky, the perfect iconic New Mexico moment. So there was a lot of magic that happened that we really needed to have happen, because the puzzle pieces were all over the place.
Yeah, you got to look at this, because we had such this great historical photo.
Alex, what page is it?
This is page 165, 166.
Oh, you have every page up there? You just...
Oh, actually, leave it there, Meredith,
Okay.
because I want to talk about that too.
Okay.
Anyway, we had this great old photos of these old mariachis, but this is the struggle. For a number of times we thought, well, okay, we have all these historic photos, but we want to pop it with what's going on now. We want that energy and color of now. And we knew there were mariachis that had performed up on the terrace over the years. We went through wedding photos, every wedding that ever was at La Fonda we went through, and nothing was a great photo. And Cyndy's like, we're gonna make this photo happen and stage it, and it was a coup. And there was a couple other photos too like that. And as long as this is up, I want to talk about this. The book had to get organized into sections. We had kind of a rough idea that the building that Barbara's going to talk about, the art collection, the hospitality, some of those, the food. But we kept coming across all this paraphernalia, ephemera, brochures, or all the graphics. And I'm a graphic designer, and I was like, this is stuff that's amazing. Cyndy and I would be like, looking through these images. I said to Jenny, we need to create a section just for this. And, who's going to write it? So I ended up writing it, which was really hard for me. Thank God we had amazing editors through this whole process that really helped us a lot. But just to give you a little window into sort of the process of this, Jenny and I had a lot of back and forth over the course of a year, and I think we all wanted it to be very genuine, true story of every aspect of La Fonda. But there were moments where Jenny goes, you can't put that in the book. It's ugly, it's dated, it's, you know, garish. And I was like, but that's La Fonda in the 80s or 90s, or there's this one with the pastel colors from the 50s. But they're so amazing. I think it's either before or after this, just before this, Meredith. This one, oh yeah, from the 50s. But it's just brilliant, you know, it gives you such a window. So anyway, I actually won most of those battles. So we got to keep a lot of good stuff in there. Yeah, that's right. Barbara, yeah.
So, in terms of the I'm going to go back to the archives for a little bit. Boy, not kidding about no archives. I think every one of us were looking at archives for different things. You were looking for text and storylines. I was down at the Zimmerman Library at UNM, trying to dig through the old meme drawings, any kind of information that meme had written. What's interesting, and I think others have heard me talk about this, meme kept, John Bob Meme, who was the architect for the official architect of record, kept copious records, thank heavens. And so there's copies of letters he wrote to Coulter, and then copies of some responses that he's got. That's really kind of all we had. But so there was some wealth of information there. Plans from the building, from Meme had drawn in 1926, and it's all on his letterhead, or his drawing. And he's got pencil sketched in portions of the wrap part of the building, so the original lobby portion. Not the whole piece, just parts of it. So kind of this kind of ephemeral is an excellent way to put it. And then something was added in 1949, but it was added and not connected to the original building, and then something was added in the 80s, and it's too expensive to draw all of the drawings, so they just added it on. So when we started the design, and I had so many stories to kind of choose through to write about. When we started the design, we talked about having somebody come in and do as-builts of the building to kind of go through everything. And the hotel thought that they had 190,000 square feet. And as I think we hired somebody from Tennessee to come in, laser, scan everything, and they had estimated 6 weeks and X thousands of dollars. And at 6 weeks, you know, they're panicking, Jenny's panicking, I'm panicking. You're not even halfway through, and they're like, yeah, we don't know, we don't understand. We now have 16 people working, you know, 7 days a week, and we don't understand. So they're going, and Jenny's like, why aren't they done? I don't know, I can't tell. And everything was in pieces and it hadn't really been assembled. Long story short, the entire square footage of the building is 300,000 square feet. And so all of the information that we had was really completely inaccurate until those first as-builts came. And when I went through the archives, because I'd now been at Zimmerman and over at the Klein Library in Arizona, Jenny kept saying, we have all these photos. And people over the years had sent postcards and notes and photos, and here's a picture of my family, and this was in my somebody aunt so-and-so's, and I just thought you should have it. And so they had copies of all these photos. And as we really started looking into it, most of those photos were copyrighted, and they had really, La Fonda's archives were copies of copyrighted photos that it took quite some time to decipher who actually owned the photos. So when Stephen and Alex were talking about how difficult it was to pull all that, it was a little brutal. And in terms of the building piece, my portion was really, again, writing about what would Mary Coulter do today if she had kind of the skills and the technology today, but there's so many stories that I could have told. I really focused on the hallways because as the building started being added onto over time, at some point, all the windows that would have happened in the hallways and would have let light into the building just slowly got, another corridor got added, another corridor got added, a room got added, this. So really, when Coulter and Meme would have done the building in the 20s, it would have been much more well lit with daylight. And so that was really one of the key things. I can remember sitting down and talking with Jenny nearly 10 years ago saying, we need a plan for every time we do something, we figure out how to get more daylight back into the building, because that clearly was one of the original goals. And so it was pretty fun to talk about the hallways, because for me that was such a personal thing about trying to get that daylight back in. So, we just had a great couple of days in Mesa Verde, which Stephen's going to talk about a little bit later. And what was so interesting in studying what Coulter was doing, and again the letters between Neem and Coulter, is how much research she had done for the Harvey Company and for Schweitzer in terms of Pueblo culture, Zuni culture, and bringing those storylines in. And if you go and you walk around the older part of La Fonda, you can see there's transoms above the doors, which have Pueblo cloud patterns. It's just a really lovely carved detail, and as an aside, that was a very difficult thing to keep in the building because they're not allowed by code anymore, and so there was a lot of negotiation with the city to keep that. And most people look at that and it's just a really beautiful detail, and ironically, most of them are upside down, which I think is lovely that Coulter probably knew which way they went, and I'm not sure if Neem didn't know which way they went, but we, at this point, have a number of friends who kind of are Native American in Pueblo, and every time they kind of walk through the hotel, they kind of tee-hee, like, we all know those are upside down, right? And so the triangular pattern that we ended up painting on the side of the door is another Pueblo cloud pattern. And so at some point, we really wanted to make sure we were continuing to tell that story in an updated, an interesting way, whether or not anybody knows it's a cloud pattern, and certainly in a way that we weren't doing any kind of cultural appropriation. But again, telling the story of La Fonda and continuing that legacy of what Jenny's doing with the artists and the artwork that the hotel continues to purchase.
Does Meredith?
Meredith, want to talk about that?
Well, I was gonna, let me segue into the art and cover for Tony Abeda, not that I can ever cover for Tony Abeda. But I don't know if y'all know Tony Abeda. He's a Navajo artist who's been a good friend of mine for about 30 years. And he's one of the premier, he has so much knowledge about art. And so when we knew we wanted to highlight the art, Tony totally came to mind. And he's actually a good writer, fabulous writer. But these are the interesting things that happen when you start this project. So I asked Tony, would you help write an essay about La Fonda's art? And he said, you know, where do you want me to start? I said, tell whatever story you want to tell. And the first draft I got back from him started with his father, who's also a very well-known Native artist who's passed away, named Hasode. The wheelwright's done shows on him. He's very well-known. And Tony started with his father's favorite painting in La Fonda. 30 years I'd known Tony. I'd never talked to him about our art. I had no idea that his father had a favorite piece of art in La Fonda, and that's how Tony started painting. He would come into La Fonda and see his father's favorite pieces in the hotel. So, I mean, these are the stories that if we hadn't, I would have never known that. But anyway, Tony did, started with Gerald Cassidy, started with the Indian school pieces, and Tony really informed us a lot about the art that we had, which Barbara and her team and I have really spent a lot of time trying to identify the artist and plaque it so that every piece in the hotel, including all of the rooms, have descriptions of the art, who painted it, where we know it, and what it represents. And so Tony has been indispensable in that. And I guess I can segue into all of the writers, Meredith included, that I asked. Some I had to spend more money on to talk into than clearly I omitted Barbara. I owe her a dinner. But, I mean, Alex, who's the professional, and Stephen would say, yes, you're supposed to pay people X per word, and if they're published, they're worth this, and all of these people wrote this and spent so much time researching and helping for peanuts and for pennies. And they did it partly because of our friendship, but partly because to really help us tell the story of La Fonda. And time again, I find that when, you know, Cyndy found that when you call somebody asking for help with La Fonda or research, people just drop everything they're doing and really go out of their way. And I think it's because there's such a collective caring in their hearts about La Fonda. And so that was really interesting to see through this process. As Cyndy said, it's good and it's bad because then everyone feels like they own a party, so they can be as critical as they want. And so sometimes it's tough to have the thick skin. But anyway, Tony was amazing, and if I would hope everyone will read his essay and then go find the art that he's talking about, because it's kind of a treasure hunt to look at the art. Meredith, do you want to go?
I've got a few. I don't have much to say, but I think something that you can pick up from hearing each of the contributors talk about their work in the book is, I think, one of the most interesting things about La Fonda is that it is really an illustration of what we talk about at these weekends every year, which is that you can approach this history from almost any angle, and there's something worthwhile to delve into. I mean, looking at the artwork, looking at the food history, looking at the lives that were influenced by being Harvey girls. There we flashed by the twins earlier, that there's really, I think La Fonda, at least for Santa Fe, for Harvey history, is the best example of a way to find something that you can hook into and really appreciate and get something out of, no matter what your kind of interests are. And so for me, that was the pleasure in being part of the book. Really came from that because as a curator, you're sort of forced to choose which stories you're going to be able to tell, like Cyndy was talking about. But things like this book, I think, really speak to the fact that one show or one book or one effort is never going to capture everything, but it does open the doors for people to get enthusiastic about some aspect of it and go out and do work on their own and build on that. And so I think that the book really does dive into so many of these topics so eloquently, and the visuals, I think, make it really work.
Talk about your essay.
Oh, so I wrote, no, I don't really want to. So I wrote in the hospitality section mostly about the Indian detours and a little bit about Harvey girls. I think, something that's really interesting about the Indian detours is that they're one of the most iconic parts of the Harvey history. When you talk to people who maybe peripherally know about Fred Harvey, they tend to know about the Indian detours and say something like, oh, wasn't there a touring company or something like that? But the Harvey company itself only ran the Indian detours from 1926 to 1931. So it's a really short period of the history where they were actually in charge of it. And so I talked a little bit about that and where people went on these tours, but also the fact that La Fonda over its time through history has changed so dramatically in terms of what is offered to guests. It really has evolved over time to meet guests' needs in a really interesting way. I mean, from the time that it was the 20s, 30s, and 40s, I think we found some brochures in our archives that spoke to the barber shops and the other retail areas and some of the other services that were available to guests. And it really, I think those types of ephemera help you realize that it was not just a building, that it was a living economy and a living space that evolved with people's needs. So I spoke a little bit about that, and of course the Harvey girls. So I don't need to talk about Harvey girls to this audience. We're all our Harvey girl experts. But it was such a joy to work on the project because bringing to light what individual places have to offer is something that I don't think we necessarily have a lot of opportunities to do with the Harvey history because it is so wide. People tend to do these, it's easier to do these kind of cursory looks at aspects of the history, and this was a chance to really just look at one location. And I think the work that Alan has done, looking at La Posada in a similar way, the work that the Herd has done, looking at the Herd's collection in a similar way, really diving deeply, is encouraging because it means that there's ways that we can do this in other areas. And also, I do want to mention that on the point of the archives. I've been through the La Fonda archives, and they're, exactly sort of what Barbara is talking about, copies of photographs and things like that. And there are a lot of photographs that are original to the Fonda archives, but I think that's something that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Jenny, but that's something that you would hope that that the community would think about, is if you do have historic photographs from your mom's wedding, your grandma's party, your grandma's 30th birthday that she had in the bar, whatever it is, that those are such gems for researchers, in the same way that this morning, Nicolasa could point to those historic photographs and link things to connect to the folk art collection. People who have photographs of La Fonda events at La Fonda, people doing things, those can become resources for people like Barbara who are doing work on the architecture or what have you. So, and we need the exterior and the sidewalk. If you have, maybe your grandma took an accidental photo where the camera was flipped on. They need that one.
Is that how you act outside?
I'm never playing charades with you.
So if you have things like that, find us and help us make that collection a little bit more robust.
It's funny you would bring up that story because it actually flashes me back one of my favorite moments of doing the work on this book. A year and a half ago, we were in Phoenix because Kathy and Diana Pardue invited us to an event at the Herd, really cool event, and afterwards we went out to eat. And it was me, Meredith, Diane, Jenny, and Kay. And Jenny was complaining about the book, that archives we don't have any pictures of weddings in Santa Fe. How is it possible that all the years of Santa Fe, we don't have any great pictures of weddings? And Kay said, well, I got married at La Fonda. And lo and behold, she had these amazing pictures from her wedding, and they ended up being used in the book. And I think Helen came up with pictures from when she was a kid here with her brother that were taken here. So it was really nice to get, what's funny is the Harvey family themselves still don't know all the things they have that we all want to see. So every time they show us something, we then put it on a slide and talk about it for Harvey weekend. And we always think, well, that must be the end. But it's never the end. So there's still great things that the family has, and it was really wonderful to do that. The other thing that I thought was funny about all this was that, so Steve Wimmer, who's the longtime concierge at La Fonda, has been telling La Fonda stories for like 30 years. So we had to fact check Steve Wimmer before we would put, so this is like Steve Wimmer's nightmare. Whoever asked the concierge for proof of their stories about this king and this queen and blah, blah, blah. So it was really kind of hilarious to watch him scramble. But I must say that, I would say that over 90% of his stories turned out to be provably true. The one thing that he kept trying to find that we didn't find was, he claimed there was a fashion spread in Vogue from the 1940s that someone told him was in Vogue, and of course I've written for Vogue a little bit, so we actually went to the Vogue archive trying to see if this was true. We were not able to prove this, but I actually believe Steve is probably right, and one day someone's going to come in with these places from Vogue to prove this. So it was, I mean, a lot of the process of it was, we didn't want to just put things in the book that we had heard a million times unless there was a written source, and there aren't that many written sources, also because the New Mexican is incredibly difficult to work with. Right, so if the Santa Fe New Mexican was digitized in words, not just in pictures on a database that none of us can afford to be on, the world would be a different place. And I will say that a lot of the newspapers in New Mexico have parts of our Fred Harvey history or La Fonda history that we haven't gleaned yet because they are too damn hard to read. And there are enough newspapers that are digitized that we kind of stick with that. But I still think a lot of the history of all those parties are probably in newspapers that are hard for us to read.
So just a couple more things. Cyndy, do you want to just speak to the food to cover JB, since you did a lot of the food and the stories?
Well, how do I pronounce? Alger? That was my struggle.
I don't know, somebody
Conrad.
pronounced it wrong.
Conrad.
Algauer?
Thank you. Was just such a, movie star story, of how he came to work at La Fonda, and then because they weren't that busy at the beginning, And much of my information, I began to refer to Steve Wimmer as the Oracle. He would just, I spent days at his apartment, is this true, is this true? And he would pull out a book from under his couch and under his bed and like turn to it, he's just encyclopedic. But I think the story of, turning the food on the trains into something edible was, part of Harvey. They were our first kind of chain restaurant. And so the beautiful dining was the story of La Fonda, and this chef was amazing. And he also, I would learn from, the Fields in town and several other longtime Santa Fe families, the Kellys. He would cater for them, all their private parties, so every woman in town, who didn't want to have to cook would just call him up, and he, probably on his, when he wasn't carving the ice sculptures, it was just, a great food story. And then just Alex and I just couldn't believe the menus, that they would do a menu for every, kind of private event, hand illustrated. It was just the community was involved in every part of La Fonda from every aspect, and that was charming. And I think we have to point out how charming it is right now that Barbara's dressed to match the headboards.
So let me just, after all the essays came in, then Alex kept saying, Jenny, you need to write one, you need to write one. No, I'm not a writer, I'm the band leader. No, Jenny, you really need to write one. And what I realized was missing in all of this was the charitable nature of La Fonda, starting with the Harveys. And so, because Stephen's book had highlighted if you've read it, so many of the stories about mothers coming in on the train, couldn't afford a meal. The Harveys, the servers realized that, not only fed them for free, packed up to-go lunches for free and sent them on their way. So this legacy of giving and charity had started from the Harveys, and clearly the balance, my predecessors totally took that baton and ran with it, and we're still trying to do that. So that's what I decided to do my essay on, which was the hospitable nature of La Fonda from the Harveys through the balance through today. And it was good, though some of the owners read it and they were like, oh, so now that it's in black and white, we're going to have to be charitable for the rest. But it's really important, and for those of you that aren't from Santa Fe, La Fonda continues to be very charitable to the community. We're partnering with the History Museum on this to make last night a profit center, we hope. But that started with the Harvey family and the Harveys. So thank you for starting such a legacy. Not only the charity, but the openness, the empathy that those that were here to hear Charlie's talk yesterday, we really feel like that baton that we've been passed needs to be carried on, and so it's quite a legacy. We've got big shoes to fill, and we're proud to do that. So, does anybody have questions about what we did, where we found stuff, or what we didn't
Can we
include?
get the lights up a little bit too, so we can see people with questions?
I have a quick question. In the 80s, I found this book about Rap and Rap, the architects. Can you talk a little bit about their part prior to John Means coming in?
So Rap and Hendrickson did the original kind of two-story portion that's on the Plaza directly, kitty corner to the Art History Museum, which that's not what it's called anymore, is it? Fine Arts Museum. And it's very interesting because, yes, there is that rap book. And Santa Fe style, Rap and Hendrickson is known for starting the Santa Fe style, whereas Meme is known for starting the New Mexico style, which I understand is a very slim line, but very, very important to memes and raps. I've heard from both. And there's no drawings. I've looked in Trinidad, I've looked in Santa Fe, I've looked in La Fonda's files, other than those kind of ephemeral trace drawings of what is meme clearly traced over wrap drawings to do his portion of the edition. We haven't been able to find anything, so that's again another one of those items. And it's interesting, clearly John Von Meem and Nancy Meemworth, who still lives in town, hugely influential. I mean, Meem has gone on to be a real powerhouse and is probably the most famous New Mexico architect. And this is a little crude, but the last man standing kind of gets to tell the story. And so it's been really edifying to me to actually be able to start talking about Rap and Hendrickson and to be talking about Harvey and Santa Fe Railroad and Coulter, because they were not talked about. And I think the very first conversation that Jenny and I had was for a fundraiser, Santa Fe Mix, which is kind of a younger group. And I remember the two of us stood on the stairs in the South Portal, and I said, Rap and Hendrickson and Mary Coulter. And people literally came up to me afterwards and said, you don't have proof.
Other questions? There's one, yes.
Would you explain why the New Mexicans were hard to read? Is it because the print just faded, or what was the problem?
She asked why the New Mexicans were hard to read. Well, the reason is there's two ways to digitize newspapers. One is to digitize them so that you can then read the words and cut and paste the words. The other is when you just take a picture of the whole page. And the New Mexican, that's the way the public archive is. I don't know if their internal archive is that way. But keep in mind that for every paper that is digitized, there are plenty that are not. So we're lucky in Las Vegas history that the funniest and most interesting newspaper, The Optic, one is still published and two is the one that got digitized. Because my interns have been through the more boring ones and they're really boring. So you don't know which paper is going to get digitized and in what form. And also what database you can get it from. So newspapers that are digitized, that are in databases that most libraries have, more people can work with them. The New Mexican is in a service that you have to pay for, out of pocket. So it's a little hard. And I mean, I'm going to be showing some pages from the New Mexican that I downloaded yesterday. But the truth is, I should be able to get real text out of those. That's the fastest way to do research. But a lot of newspapers didn't do it that way. So in Fred Harvey research, we are dealing with, if you take Kansas away, which is a whole other area of research, but if you just take the Southwest, the number of newspapers that used to exist in New Mexico and Arizona that could give you information, because all these people, Mary Coulter, Fred Harvey, Ford Harvey, everybody that worked for them, it was news when they came to town and what they did. So it's amazing how much we still don't know, because a lot of the northern Arizona newspapers, Coconina Sun, burned. So many years of it don't exist. I'm pronouncing that forest wrong, right? No, is it? And some other papers just aren't digitized yet. So there are still many stories to be found in newspapers, but unfortunately it's going to mean actually opening them up or reading them in a little bit harder way to deal with. Are there other questions about the book?
Well, I would just like to close by thanking Alex. Friday afternoon, as I was leaving my office, I found out there's a award in New Mexico given by the Hospitality Association called the Top Hat Awards. And we entered the book in, it didn't really fit any of the categories, but there was one called the Most Innovative Campaign. And we did enter the book, and we don't know if we've won, but we're a finalist for the top 4 for the state. Thank you, Alex.
Help me thank the panelists for participating. And we're just going to change the setup of the stage. Now might be a good time to run the rest of it if we need to. We're going to start about 5 minutes or so. And we'll see you in a minute. And next up is Jeff Off. Yeah.
I live in the bathroom.
I wish I lived in the heater right now.
Yeah, that too. I know, it's really chilly.
As a matter of fact.
Oh, do you need the pleasure? Film this one out. Look at it. And just give it to you. And just give it to me. Okay. Yay, good, yay, thank you. Yeah. I love that. I know these are so great. So you get two, so you put your name on this and you just fill this out and cross it. And then